removal of physician signature from the athletic trainers protocol in Wisconsin. I think that obviously was a big step, but I'm not entirely sure, even in talking with colleagues within the state, that everybody fully understands what that meant and why that was important. So if we could start, I think Mikey had mentioned it a little bit of like that was part of the process of licensure and having a good relationship with physician groups there. Um, but what that actually meant and why removing it was a big step, and what that now means for specifically ATs in Wisconsin and how they can practice.
Well, I mean, there's kind of a two-pronged approach as to why that was important. I guess a simple word that describes it is we want to try to achieve independence or autonomy in what we do.
Yep.
While our relationships with our physicians are important, they're vital, right? We need to kind of be able to maintain that continuity of patient care and those communication pathways. One of the problems that the protocol and physician signature requirement kind of produced, or one of the effects of that, was you often had physicians then taking on some sort of liability of that athletic trainer's actions. And over time, some of our physicians in the state started to kind of pull back on that because of that liability issue. It did create kind of some unique issues where you had new athletic trainers coming into environments where maybe the physician didn't know that person, but now we're suddenly asking them to sign off on their skill set and kind of be their so-called mentor. And I don't want to use the word supervisor, but that was kind of the mindset that many of them had. And they thought, well, I'm not directly supervising this person. This person's off at their school and making decisions on the sideline and doing those types of things. There was kind of that perceived liability issue that became kind of problematic from their end. So it was a huge step in terms of helping us develop that autonomy. And if somebody wanted to, say, create their own practice, whether it was an independent clinical setting or whether they wanted to go out and work in an industrial setting or whatever it may be, it became a challenge to find a physician that would kind of agree to be their consulting physician. And so the other thing is some of the language in the Practice Act, looking at the physician signature, required us to communicate with a consulting physician if we had issues with a patient or an athlete that we were treating. So that was one of the things we pulled out earlier, simply because the physician had no idea who my starting shortstop was here at METC. The kid's from, Verona, but my consulting physician is over here on the east side of town. So there were just kind of some logistical things that came into play. But I think the biggest thing was encouraging people to kind of view themselves as kind of an independent healthcare provider, but that's part of an overall sports medicine team or kind of a medical community. And it probably wasn't a big of issue for somebody like me that works in a fairly large institution where we have multiple physicians who we work with in the clinical setting and whose patients we rehab in the rehabilitation setting. But it was somewhat challenging for people that were in smaller environments, for people that maybe were new to the state and were looking for jobs. So it was a big step in promoting that autonomy and helping to assuage some of the concerns that the physicians had from a liability standpoint.
Yeah, it's a really unique development nationally too, that I'm kind of watching with interest to see if other states follow, because there are obviously positives for us, being able to function as autonomous providers and define our own protocol, and also be responsible for our own protocol. Is if there are things that we write in, we have to also demonstrate competence into our protocols. But this is driven just as much by the state medical society as us. And like Mike indicated, is physicians became concerned about what their level of liability would be, and they didn't know what that was. So to me, I think it'll be interesting to watch if this continues with other states, and if this becomes concerns of the physician providers in other states. I certainly have heard from athletic trainers around the country often many in more traditional settings that are concerned with a movement like this because they think it may diminish our ties with physicians potentially. And I don't see that at the practical level being the case. Is, we work closely with all of our doctors. They make referrals to us, they help define our care. And I think it's a big change versus how we function in essentially every practice act in the country right now. So those are just some things I'm watching for and curious to see what happens in the future with other states.
Joe
Yeah,
brought
no,
up,
go ahead.
sorry, Joe brought up the State Medical Society. It's kind of an interesting conversation that happened with them in regards to this change, because when we proposed it, they initially weren't sure what to do with it, but through the relationships we have, especially with some of the UW team physicians, a couple of them wrote letters in support of this. And the person that was working with the State Medical Society basically said, well, if you guys think it's okay, I'm cool with it. So again, it goes back to kind of the relationships and having those good relationships. And when you can develop that and you can get those people on your side, it just kind of smooths the process and it helps facilitate things. The other thing that came up at times, and we looked at other practice acts, whenever we look at ours, we kind of look at what's in the overall statutes relating to healthcare professions. We're the only people that had that requirement.
Right.
So it was, kind of, if it's good enough for you, is it good enough for us type of thing at times when we had those discussions. But as Joe said, is kind of just a natural evolution of how we were kind of trying to move things forward and advance our language and the opportunities then that could be available for athletic trainers as a result of it. But like Joe said, it doesn't really negate any of the relationships that we've developed, and in some ways it might even enhance it. So there certainly are, I can understand the risks and concerns people would have, but I think part of it is having confidence in who we are and what we do. And I think those relationships we establish with our physicians help them feel comfortable from their end as well.
Yeah, I always had that question of, if I worked at the university, we had our team physician, they signed off, everything felt good there. But what if I wanted to go cover this random PRN event that, that wasn't directly tied to my daily work? And like, what did that mean for the physician? Like, did I need to make sure they were okay with it, let alone your own personal liability for going off and doing something because you're now not under, the umbrella of a larger institution or a health system, especially if you're not getting paid through that entity. So that was always one of my questions too, is like, how did that all play out? And if I were a physician, I'd been like, well, wait a second. This isn't benefiting me at all, for the risk that I might be taking. So I think that's a really good point.
Right. And when we asked them to sign off on those things, they were signing off with the understanding, okay, this is what your kind of scope is that you're going to be working on. And these are the locations, these are the groups, these are those types of things. And if you want to go out as an independent provider, which fine, it's your right to do so. But is that what we asked our physicians to sign off on? So again, it goes back to clear communication and a full understanding of that prior to those types of things happening. But now this kind of makes that point moot, right? So now you can still do those things. You might have to get your own liability insurance to do it, or other protections from a risk management standpoint. But it kind of opened up those opportunities where if you do want to go in and contract as an independent provider, now you can do that without having the concerns of tracking down your physician and communicating that prior to them, or finding, you can only have one consulting physician. So it was important that you found one that would allow you to kind of do the things you needed to do to work in your chosen environments. That's a great point.
One more question around this, and more from your guys' experience or what you've heard, especially being tied into UW Health and all the outreach ATs there. It came up a little bit within the NCAA realm as I was leaving that area. Is how could this impact return to play decisions, concussion clearance, any of those things? Because some of that was underneath, potentially underneath the physician, but does that now kind of shift to what are the policies for an example of the NCAA? Do they require, physician final clearance, or the state association, the WIA in our instance, of what those protocols are to help doing that? Or could it potentially, based on what the state looks like, put more of that onto the athletic trainer to make those bigger decisions around specific injuries?
You want me to take that one, Joe? Um, well, if it's done right, it shouldn't change anything, right? We basically still have our protocols that we follow. When dealing with specifically with concussions, our Concussion Practice Act doesn't really specify who has to make that decision. It
Okay.
has to be a healthcare provider that's been trained in the recognition and management of concussions and
Sure.
head injuries. So, some of those decisions are based on what certain state laws would require, right? And so a high school or the NCAA can't supersede what the local laws are in that particular state. So the policies and the things that are um, are developed kind of have to at least tie into and be consistent with what the statutes say. But as far as decision making, return to play, I think that's best decided and best executed when it's a conversation that happens between all the people involved, right? It has to involve the athlete, it has to involve the physician, it has to involve the coaching staff and the strength and conditioning staff, or however that progression and that transition is occurring. So, does it mean that an athletic trainer can or should make those decisions? Well, it's kind of what we do, right? I have all the time, I have
Sure.
conversations
Yep.
with my physicians who say, okay, I don't need to see you, work with your athletic trainer, and then you can get back when they feel you are ready. Right. So then that falls back on us to make sure that we have the skill set and, we have the return to play protocols in place to understand how to best do that. And if we can't, or if we aren't sure, that's when you just have to know your own limitations for whatever injury you might be dealing with or whatever situation, and then working within your group and with those that can help you make that decision. So the decision that is made is the best one to get that athlete back as swiftly as possible, but as safely as possible. Did that answer your question?
Yep. No, absolutely. I think it was, one of those, sometimes you get maybe not the healthcare provider that you want clearing somebody for something when you wanted them to go to a physician and with somebody else, and could, depending on where you're at, or, somebody's desire to get back, try and have almost potentially people making calls that, based on the other policies and the laws and things, were not how it should be done, if this opened up anything in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, and we also have ATs and MDs who are on the WIA medical advisory board who help make these decisions, at least at the high school level and middle school level anyway. But in the end, Joel, our protocol, this was really negotiated in so we could get our initial regulation in every state. Is some of the people who may not have wanted us to have regulation said this is something that provides extra safety to the public to have a physician sign off on our protocol. And there were certain things that just weren't realities about having a protocol in place. And so, I do think it's something that deserves continual scrutiny as to whether or not we should have one in every state. I do think it will probably come up in other states, but other healthcare professions don't have something like this. And I think we are a mature enough allied health profession at this point in time to be able to make those decisions and know when we need to refer or need to pass a decision on to someone else. And, and I think we deserve that respect as a profession as well.
Agreed.
Joel, I think you kind of said it earlier when you said, do I know what I know? Do I know what I don't know? Right. In essence, that's kind of what all healthcare providers do, is knowing when you might need help or you might need assistance, and that's okay. We can't be experts at everything on everybody all the time. So understanding that, and as our profession matures, these are some of the responsibilities that come along with working in this field. But as Joe said, working through the WAA, and, Tim McGuine has been working with the National Federation for years to kind of develop these things. And so as those policy and things emerge, again, they hopefully will kind of mirror what our efforts here from a legislative standpoint. But that's just part of any healthcare profession is knowing when to refer or defer judgment to somebody else.